Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're going to talk about forms in SnappyForge and the settings that go along with them. When you first log in as a new user, you don't have any forms. To create one, you're going to click a new form. A form in SnappyForge is actually two forms. It's an add and an edit and a list view that goes along with it. And you create all three at the same time as you edit your form, which we'll get to in another video. But these settings are really important for the form as a whole. So let's go through them one by one. The first thing that we have here is form name, and it's the only one that's required. You can call your form whatever you like, but usually you'd want to give it a name that kind of represents the entities that you're going to collect data on. Customers, survey results, anything else you wish. We're going to call ours customers for fun. Now, the rest of these settings are optional, and you don't really have to change any of them. And of course you can change all of them at any time you like. But let's go through them one by one while we're here. No data text. When you're looking at the list view, there's a default thing that comes up if you don't have any data in your form yet. I think it's something along the lines of there are no results. If you wanted to override that, you can type that here. Allow sorting. By default, it's on. Any data column that you snap into SnappyForge when you're looking at the list view, you're allowed to click on the top of the column header and it will sort. And if you click it again, it will sort in reverse. You can turn that off if you wish. By default, it's usually good to leave it on. It helps you find things quicker if you need to. Allow paging. By default, pages are set, so once you reach a page size of 25 or higher, it will break into another page. You can also set the page size anything you wish. If you turn paging off, your list will just be one long list. You can turn paging on, and you can also set this number page size to be whatever you like. Pager align. When you're looking at the list view, the bottom underneath the list is where the pager comes up. That's the control that controls what page the user is looking at. You can set it to not set, left, center, or right. By default, it's on the right-hand side, so it'll be on the lower right of the grid, but you can put it anywhere you wish. So we'll put it on left. Allow filters. This takes a little bit more time to set up, but you are able to create filters to actually allow people to find things in your list view. By default, it's off, but you can turn it on. And by default, the filters pane would be closed, so if there are filters, by default, they would be hidden, and then there would be a little collapsible pane that would then be clicked on to open the filters pane open. If you wanted it to be open by default, you can leave this checkbox on. Now, on the form itself, there's columns. By default, there's one column, which means there's one data item per line. We can actually change that to be multiple columns if we wanted to. We'll set ours to 3 just to be able to show how all this works later. Tooltips is something you probably won't need right now, so we're not going to cover that in this video. And the last things we're going to talk about, well, it's two things we're going to talk about, is style and then time zone. So style, depending on what level you have access to different styles, and just by changing it you'll see how it can change. Labels above field with the default rounded, labels above field squared, or just standard squared, which keeps everything square looking, or standard, which is the labels are to the left and we're rounded. Then you can also change some of the fonts, which we're going to add a lot more later, and you can change some of the colors. Now keep in mind, if you are going to use widgets and bring this form into your own website, your website can override all of the styles, so it can kind of look like your website. It'll look seamless. But for the most part, this gives you some flexibility in creating forms and what they should look like. The last thing we're going to talk about is default time zone. SnappyForge takes all date times and converts them down to universal coordinated time. What that means is that a user in the Pacific, on the Pacific time zone, could enter a date and time at, let's say, 3 p.m. SnappyForge will take that and convert it into a universal date. Then when another user comes in and looks at that data item, it would be converted back to their local time zone. So let's say now someone from the East Coast comes in and looks at that date time. Instead of seeing 3 p.m. Pacific, they'll see 6 p.m. Eastern. You can actually make things localized if you wish. You can change it to whatever time zone you wish, but for the most part, this can be just left as default. If you do change it, what would happen is everything would be saved as the time zone in which you set. So if the user in the Pacific sets 3 p.m. for a date, the user on the East Coast will see the same thing. When they open it back up, it'll still say 3 p.m. So for the most part, it's usually good to leave it as default, which is just to use universal coordinated time. But just keep that in mind. So we're going to click Save, and this form will get created. And here's our new form. Now, we have no controls in here yet. Every form that gets created will always have an ID field that will count up starting at 1. So this way you can keep a unique track of how many entries you have, and you can uniquely identify any individual entry that comes in. We're not going to add anything to this form because that's not what this tutorial is for. We'll come back to this in a little bit. Now, you can see that we called our thing customers. Our form is called customers. Our no data text was no customers. There are no customers. Here it is. At any point, we can click from this form, edit form, and here are the same settings. So we can always go ahead and change that at any time. And that's it for today's video. Next, we'll go ahead and create our customers list.